Gravity. It's a force we experience every day. It surrounds us, it penetrates us, it binds the galaxy together. No, literally, that's what it does. It keeps planets around suns, suns around galaxies, and your butt firmly planted in that chair. Unless you're one of these 650 and counting human beings who have been to space, you've experienced a relatively constant force of gravity for your entire life. So why do video games always get it wrong? Ever since 1975's Steeplechase, the first arcade game to ever include a jump button, video games have had to simulate gravity. And you'd think, considering it's a force that we experience every minute of every day of our entire lives, we would have a very good intuitive understanding of it and instantly be able to tell when games get it wrong. And you'd be wrong about that, because it turns out, based on my research, that less than 10% of video games are able to accurately simulate gravity. Out of these 20 games here, which 2 do you think get the closest? And today, I want to figure out why. Why do so many games opt to have unrealistic gravity? Why do games with crazy weak or strong gravity feel so right? And what game has the most realistic gravity of them all? Richard, hit that intro. Oh! So, how do we calculate the strength of gravity in a video game? Well, the same way you do it in real life. Geronimo! Let's break it down. The strength of any force can be found by multiplying the mass of an object by its acceleration. And gravity is no exception. Now, the force of gravity acting on you at any given moment remains generally constant. You're never going to be walking around and spontaneously shoot up into the air. And your mass is also not going to spontaneously change on its own. And if the force is the same and the mass is the same, that means that the acceleration due to gravity that you experience must also be constant. This makes it the best metric to measure gravity across a whole world or planet because it's independent of the thing you're using to measure it. Here on Earth, the acceleration due to gravity is equal to 9.8 meters per second squared. What does that mean? Well, meters per second is a unit of speed, the distance you travel in a given amount of time. Acceleration is basically just the next step in that chain. It measures your change in speed in a given time. So here on Earth, if you're falling, your speed will increase by a constant 9.8 meters per second for each second that you fall. Now, if you've ever taken a physics class, this is probably one of the first things you learned. But I wanted to bring it up because it highlights the 4 pieces of our little gravity puzzle. Distance, speed, acceleration, and time. That all relate to each other in different ways. And the cool thing about a puzzle is that if you have 3 of the 4 pieces, you can figure out exactly what the last one will look like. In the world of physics, we can find this last piece using what are called the kinematic equations. Think of them like different arrangements of this puzzle to solve for that final missing piece. Now, how do we know which one to use? Well, our final goal is to find the acceleration, so that has to be one of our pieces, which means this one here is out. From here, we could technically use any of these, but measuring speed and velocity in video games is kind of annoying. Last I checked, there are no speedometers in Hyrule, and these 2 equations require 2 different speeds. So Let's go with this one right here, which states that your change in position, or the distance that you've traveled, is equal to your initial velocity times the time it took you to travel said distance, plus 1/2 your acceleration times your time squared. We want to know the acceleration, which means we need to find the distance, starting velocity, and time. This sounds like a lot of work, but here at the Chiptide Show, we like to work smarter and not harder. And there's actually a way we can make our jobs a whole lot easier. We're looking to find the downward acceleration due to gravity. So we're gonna basically need to measure the time it takes something to fall a given distance, and the speed at which they started. The easiest way to do this is to grab a ruler and a stopwatch and just jump. Now this is gonna sound dumb obvious, but when you jump, you start by moving up. We'll call that the positive direction. And when you come back down, you're moving in the negative direction. That means that at some point in between, your velocity had to transition from a positive number to a negative number. And the only way to do that continuously is if your speed was, at the very apex of your jump, at the point where you switch directions, exactly 0. There is a small fraction of a second where you're not moving at all. So if we simply start our measurement at the apex of a jump, we can simply plug in 0 for our initial velocity and effectively wipe this whole section out of the equation. Do a little fancy algebraic rearranging, and we get an equation where we can simply plug in our vertical distance and time and get ourselves the acceleration due to gravity in that world. Now the problem is, most games don't have some nice gym wall and some tape to measure your hops, so we're gonna have to get a little creative and find something in the world of the game with a known real-world height to give us our scale. For example, Mario typically doesn't have a bunch of rulers lying around, but it usually does contain at least one Mario, who shall become our unwilling ruler. Like the ones that you measure stuff with. Now, that sounded way more ominous than I thought. According to Nintendo, Mario is exactly 155 centimeters tall, or about 5'1". We stand a short king. In the original Super Mario Bros., we can use a little image editing wizardry to find that you can jump exactly 1.71 Marios high, which equates to exactly 2.65 meters. For reference, that's over twice the vert of Michael Jordan. I don't call him Jumpman for nothing. But before you go crowning the new GOAT, remember that gravity is the name of the game here. And clearly, Mario's getting a little assist. I mean, put me on the moon, I could probably also out-jump Jordan. Or I don't know, maybe not. I really hurt myself in that opening bit. So let's finish off this little puzzle. It takes exactly 0.236 seconds for Mario to fall from the apex of his jump to the ground. If we plug these into our equation, we can find that the acceleration due to gravity in the Mushroom Kingdom is a measly 95.18 meters per second squared, or roughly 9.7 times stronger than that of Earth's, in a unit typically referred to as a G. Put this man on Earth, and he could leap clean over a 2-story home. But hey, this is an old game. Maybe it's just a fluke. And now that we know all the math, finding the gravity in other games should be pretty easy. Just find something of a known height to get the scale of the world, jump, and measure the time it takes to hit the ground. If you want to get fancy, you could count frames and use the game's frame rate to get an exact measurement, or you could just get a stopwatch and get as close as you can. I measured the gravity of 20 different games, but if you want to run your own little experiments for your own favorite game, I'd love to hear about it in the comments down below. The most annoying part of this process is definitely trying to get an accurate scale. And since we have a definitive, official height for Mario, that's not all backed up by his appearance alongside real-world basketball players, but we'll just ignore that, I went ahead and calculated the gravity in basically every other Mario game I could. And well, none of them hit the ludicrous 9.7 Gs of the original. Every single Mario game across the board had gravity that was around 4 to 5 times stronger than Earth. The most realistic was the most recent Mario Wonder at 2.41 Gs, while the next highest was Mario Odyssey at 5.4. Even the absolute weakest Mario gravity is about the equivalent of trying to jump on Jupiter. Which, I guess you probably haven't done, so I don't know, that wasn't the most helpful comparison. Now, the exception to this powerful gravity is, of course, Mario Odyssey's moon level, where the gravity is still 1.45 times stronger than Earth, and 8.8 times stronger than our actual moon. Now, of course, Mario is an incredibly cartoonish game. I don't think the game where a plumber eats various flora and fungi to get magical powers in his war against an army of sentient turtles was really going for hyper-realism. So let's take a look at the other end of the spectrum, Rockstar's Red Dead Redemption 2. Surely the game where your beard grows in real time and your horse reacts to the cold in ways that I cannot show on camera got the gravity right. Right? Claudia! Wrong! At 2.68 Gs, the world of Red Dead has slightly stronger gravity than Mario Wonder, which does not seem possible, but we'll get to that later. At this point, I basically just ran through my whole Steam library, throwing every protagonist I could find off the nearest cliff of a known height. Surely, there had to be one game that lets you reach Chelonia in a reasonable length of time. Which means it's time for a rapid-fire quiz round. I'll name a game, pause the video, and guess how many Gs you think that world has. Minecraft, 3.71 Gs. Yeah, I'm going fast, keep up. Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, 2.76 Gs. Peak? With how little height you get, it seems like this game should have an absolutely crushing gravity. But nope, it's the first game with less gravity than Earth at just 0.71 Gs. Marvel Rivals is surprisingly close for being the most comic booky game of all time with just under 2 Gs. Halo has just over half the gravity of Earth at 0.61 Gs. Gotta spin those rings a little faster, boys. And if we head over to another galaxy far, far away, we can find that every single planet and space station in Star Wars Outlaws has a constant gravity of 1.7 Gs, which is a whole nother can of worms we can't even get into. Of these 20 games that I looked at, 21 if you count Mario Odyssey twice, there were exactly 2 that came within a margin of error of 15% of Earth's real-world gravity. 2 games that are perhaps about as different as you could possibly get. The open-world third-person action game Elden Ring, and the first-person puzzle game Portal 2. I didn't test the original, but I'm guessing it's around the same. At just over 11 meters per second squared, the Lands Between and the Aperture Science Facility are the only 2 video game worlds that I could find that are able to accurately simulate gravity. Until you realize that your horse technically experiences less gravity than you do, but it's also like a weird ghost thing, so I'm gonna ignore that for now. Now, while we all love to poke fun at the absurdity of these video game worlds, I'm not that guy who expects hyper-realism in every bit of fiction they consume. The truth is, most of these games aren't trying to accurately simulate the physics of our world. They're trying to be fun. And that's the part I'm more curious about. Because across all these games, I noticed a few pretty consistent trends. In general, both 2D and 3D platformers had the highest gravity, averaging out at around 4.34 Gs. Now, of course, the vast majority of these platformers were Mario games specifically, so it may not be a representative sample of the whole genre, but it still does make some amount of sense. After all, falling is boring. Most platforming games have very exaggerated jump heights to add more verticality to the levels and make them more interesting. And do you really think Super Mario Bros. Would be more fun if it took 3 times longer to get back to the ground to keep on playing? Heck, look at Mario Odyssey's moon level. Yeah, it takes forever for Mario to come back down to the ground, but that's only because he can launch himself 5.5 meters into the air. Go watch someone dive off an 18-foot diving board and see how long it takes them to reach the bottom. A higher gravity keeps the games snappier and more action-packed. Sure, Elden Ring does have some pretty realistic gravity. And any section where you have to jump can absolutely kiss my ass. The only exception to this rule that I could find was Hollow Knight Silksong, which actually has significantly less gravity than Earth. But it's also a game about bugs with a scale that's very hard to define, so maybe take that one with a grain of salt. Most realistic third-person action games tend to have gravity around twice as strong as Earth, paired with a still somewhat exaggerated jump, because most real-world people have no hops, and you get a world that still feels realistic enough to not raise any alarm bells in your brain without adding a ton of unnecessary downtime in the air. And on the flip side, I found that first-person games tend to have lower gravity, making them feel more floaty. Now, I couldn't find any research or anecdotes from game developers to definitively say why this is the case, but I do have a hypothesis that has to do with camera control. In a first-person game, you have a much narrower field of view than you do in a third-person game, or even in real life where you have the benefit of your peripheral vision. This means that you can't see as much of the ground relative to you as you fall, forcing you to have to turn the camera more in the air to see where you're going to land. A third-person game also has the benefit of the camera not being locked directly to the player's movement. You can add some dampening or simply not follow the character upwards when they jump, reducing a lot of the vertical movement that could make some players motion sick. Perhaps first-person games opt to give you a little more hang time in the air to give you some more time to orient yourself and to keep any sudden vertical camera jolts to a minimum. But if there are any real game developers watching who have some more specific insights that I haven't thought of, I would absolutely love to hear it. I'll pin your comment or something so everyone can go read, go learn some cool stuff. However, there was one more interesting trend that I found that could explain why Elden Ring and Portal specifically were the only 2 games to get it right. The actual acceleration due to gravity and the jump heights tended to vary pretty dramatically across these games, even from ones from the same franchise. But there was one thing that remained eerily constant: the time. In nearly every 2D platformer I tested, no matter how high you jump, it always takes around 0.42 seconds to get back to the ground, within a few hundredths of a second of each other. 3D platformers tended to be a bit faster at 0.35 seconds, while non-platforming games, regardless of perspective, had a fall time of around 0.5 seconds. It seems like the time is the more important metric here for developers, which makes sense considering everything we just talked about. You pick how high you want your character to jump, you pick how quickly they get back to the ground, and then the gravity just sort of comes out in the wash. Did FromSoft and Valve have physicists on staff doing the math for them? I mean, maybe, and if so, give me a call, alright? I'll make Portal 3 the most realistic game people have ever seen. We'll put in those moving portal puzzles to make the internet so mad. It'll be great. But more likely, they just got lucky and picked a scale for their world that ended up with some somewhat accurate gravity. Still, call me though, Valve. We can make this happen, finally. And there you have it. Why gravity in video games is almost always wrong. If you like this video and want to keep that physics train rolling, maybe check out this video exploring why ice in video games is almost always right. Now, if you'll excuse me, I think we all saw the ending to this video coming a mile away. So I'll see you all next week. And a massive thank you to all my supporters on Patreon, including Aspa102, Alakazam, Captain Kirby, Sherry and Mark, Sidian, Big Dog Ty for to win, The Boss Killer 94, Stylish, Ty Studio, Alex, and Richard Devotee III.